And it's a travel agency, movie theaters in small communities. No, perhaps young Mexicans that cannot go another places to know another culture, another way of thinking. They discover this diversity by the travel agency that is a movie theater. It's just great. No, they can travel any place, anytime by the screen.
This is the Box Office Podcast. I'm Daniel Loria, the editorial director of Box Office Pro, the only publication in North America exclusively dedicated to covering the world of theatrical exhibition. Here this week with our co-host, Rebecca Pahle, deputy editor at Box Office Pro, and our chief analyst, Shawn Robbins. In this week's episode, we will be speaking with Roberto Quintero, the convention director of CineShow Mexico, an event taking place in Puebla, Mexico on September 28th and 29th, bringing together the Mexican exhibition business, looking at everything that's going on in that market. That's coming up in our feature interview segment. But we're going to be opening once again, looking at the week's news and going over some box office figures with Shawn. Let's start with the Cinema Day celebration, guys. Did you guys make it out to the movies this weekend? And did you go on Saturday?
I did. I went to see Jaws in IMAX with my boyfriend. He said, yeah, I've seen that movie 50 times, and seeing it in IMAX, like I'm seeing new micro expressions in Robert Shaw's face that I'd never seen before. So yeah, it was a good experience.
Which theater did you go to?
The AMC Lincoln.
That's my hometown multiplex, I think. It's right on the one train line for me. Shawn, did you make it out this weekend?
Fortunately, I didn't. My nephew's birthday party was Saturday, so unfortunately, out of all the days, I was really bummed.
I was on the same boat. I was in Texas visiting my sister and her 1-year-old, and I decided to babysit the 1-year-old so my sister and her husband could go to the movies. They went over to the Galaxy Highland and checked out the Spider-Man No Way Home re-release. They'd never done the D-Box immersive seating over at Galaxy Theaters. They were able to do it, enticed by that $3 offer, and loved it. They're probably going to go back in that format. It's, I think, one of those takeaways from the weekend, how folks were able to go and test out some of those premium formats that they hadn't before, now that they're at a lower ticket point.
So, yeah, Daniel, Cinema Day or something of this type has never really been tried in the North American market, where you have all tickets across all formats being so steeply discounted. So talking about like the box office, the numbers of last weekend, there's not really any use to that. Shawn, I'm gonna ask if you agree with that. The numbers are a little bit irrelevant.
Yeah, this is one of those days. Kind of once it was announced, it just seemed inevitable that it's. Yeah, I will say it's a one-off in some ways, but if this becomes an annual tradition, they actually could have some value once we come around to this time next year. If it's maybe every Labor Day or structured around this time of year. So, but as far as a week-to-week basis, yeah, everything this past Saturday had a giant asterisk, if not the whole weekend.
What we do have is that per NATO, 8.1 million people bought tickets for Cinema Day. That puts admissions at 9% ahead of the prior Saturday, which of course did not have discounted tickets. So it brought a lot of people in. Over that 3-day weekend, Spider-Man No Way Home with the extended 11 minutes took the top spot. Then Top Gun Maverick did quite well on Labor Day, and it ended up taking the top spot. But there's actually one film in the top 5 that, as I was looking at this box office, it kind of intrigued me, and that is DC League of Super Pets, which, Shawn, can you remind us how that did when it came out?
High expectations were higher. It certainly underperformed on opening weekend. It's had solid legs since then, or at least relatively solid. It has still been front-loaded compared to a lot of other animated movies just because it has that DC tie-in, but typically around Labor Day, we see movies like that, whether or not they're, giant Minions level movies or maybe middle tier animated like this. They tend to hold very well at this time because it's when parents will take kids back out. A lot of areas in the country are already back in school, but some aren't. So this is kind of one of those weekends historically pre and now post COVID lockdowns that it's living up to that expectation of a family movie doing really well over this holiday.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely saw that over National Cinema Day. It went from 6th place last weekend to 3rd place this weekend, and I'm talking about the 3-day totals, an almost 32% jump from the previous weekend. And the same was true of Minions: The Rise of Gru. That also had a jump, though that one only just shy of 16%. So a lot of families, it looks like, taking advantage of those lower ticket prices to get the kids out to maybe things that they've been meaning to see that had been in theaters for a while. I think it's interesting how this concept kind of interacts with kids' movies and how that might play out in the future if this does become an annual thing.
I think that's a fair question, and it's one of the things that I think Jackie Brenneman was saying, the president of the Cinema Foundation that organized this initiative here in the United States, that this was a trial. They couldn't commit that this would happen every year. They couldn't commit that if it was going to happen again, it would take place over the same weekend, Labor Day weekend frame, but that they did expect with the decreased ticket price that family films would overperform. We saw that happen, as you mentioned, Rebecca, and that people would go out and try out those premium formats, something that I think we also saw across the board. In the UK, we saw similarly positive results. Remember, this was an initiative that was also simultaneously organized in the UK and Irish markets. In the UK market, 1.46 million admission, guys. That is above the 1.34 million admissions set by the UK market last time they tried a National Cinema Day, all the way back in 1997 with a £1 ticket price. That was 25 years ago, guys. So 25 years after the last time this happens, at a £3 ticket price, there's more cinema admissions going in. This is evidence of that success. That number of admissions is around 3 times the number of tickets sold during the pre-COVID era for the same frame. So these are strong results that we've seen not only in the US market, also in the UK. I think it's a great initiative. Hopefully we get to see it back. And talking about initiatives of bringing moviegoers back to theaters, advertising the experience itself. Rebecca, a big headline for this week, MoviePass is back from the dead.
MoviePass is back again. Officially, the launch was on Labor Day. They are rolling out in select markets, those being Chicago, Dallas, and Kansas City. So what we know now is honestly not a ton more than we knew before. There are different pricing tiers at $10, $20, $30. It can be used at any theater that accepts a major credit card. It'll open in waves across the market. I'm reading from their website here. The launch determination will be weighed on level of engagement from the wait list in each market, as well as locations of exhibition partners.
I think time will tell on what happens. I think this wait and see approach, market by market, I think they're testing things out. They're trying to see just how viable it is before they make that national commitment. An interesting detail about those cities that you mentioned: Kansas City, not too far from where AMC Theaters is located. Dallas, not too far from Plano, where the Cinemark headquarters are. So, an interesting little asterisk there with that initial rollout from MoviePass. Let's look at the box office this weekend, guys, because after a couple of slow frames, we are, I hate to say it, not probably back to normal. Usually this is that New Line weekend from Warner Brothers where a big horror title is supposed to come out and reignite the box office. It's been that way for how long now, Shawn, has New Line owned that weekend?
Quite a while. It seems like for the better part of a decade that a horror movie, usually New Line or Warner Brothers, had been opening right around this time. It was supposed to be Salem's Lot this year, but as we now know, that is delayed indefinitely at the moment.
We're not getting a New Line horror, but we are getting a horror film in the form of Barbarian, which I've heard amazing things about from people I trust. They were like, don't look up anything, just go see it. So that one is really high at the top of my list to see. Though we also have an Indian film coming over too, which, Shawn, what are your expectations for Barbarian versus Brahmastra? Because it seems like they are so different. How do you even begin to try to compare the two?
Yeah, I can't think of a different pair of movies that have opened in a while, but we've seen Indian movies really do well in recent years. I think RRR was a great example of that. It opened over $9 million in just 1,200 theaters earlier this year domestically, and that's the comp, I think, for Brahmastra. And ticket sales look pretty good, and it's kind of in that position where I would not be shocked to see it upset Barbarian and give a run for that number one opening, because Barbarian itself is opening in about 2,200 locations, so it's still a wide release, but Disney / 20th Century Studios aren't putting that full force release strategy behind it, like most of these Warner Brothers horror movies we usually talk about. So hopefully word of mouth will carry that, and the R rating can kind of appeal to that horror audience getting in the mood for Halloween now that we get into the fall. But if you're asking me to place a bet, it would be very hard, because I would not be surprised to see Brahmastra end up at number 1 this weekend.
You know, that's not kind of limited. It's still a wide release, 2,200 locations, like you mentioned, Shawn, but it's not a proper wide release. When I was in Dallas for CineShow, the convention of the theater owners of Mid-America, I heard this complaint from a lot of independent exhibitors. There are movies coming out that we are not getting access to, that are only going to the major markets, that when they do go out to smaller towns and cities, they go to the circuits. We're getting overlooked with titles that we'd like to get our hands on. I think this is a big concern. Hopefully Barbarian does well in the box office, but I can't for the life of me understand why 20th Century Studios / Disney doesn't go wider with this title. There's nothing else on other than a title to counter-program this one.
It's a fair question, and I honestly don't have an answer.
So we know that's going to be a challenge, guys. But Shawn, what can you tell us about the rest of the month of September? There's a couple of titles coming out that might perform decently well, even though they're not established IPs. They're original movies that I've been calling for over a year. Now I have to back it up with my ticket dollars. I'm going to be paying money to see Don't Worry, Darling. I'm going to be paying money to see The Woman King and Bros. Will other people also be doing that?
Yeah, this is really that point where we get several original films in a row, and that's what we expect to see after a summer. And I think The Woman King is really interesting to me, because it has kind of an action element, but it's also positioned as a drama, and Viola Davis is obviously kind of a force to be reckoned with. Her popularity has just skyrocketed in recent years. I'm pretty confident in that one. I think it could do well, but then we also look at the Avatar re-release and Don't Worry, Darling opening the same weekend. That's a fascinating showdown to me. And then at the end of the month, I also like Bros and Smile coming out against each other, a comedy and a horror movie. That's kind of one of those classic pre-COVID weekends to me. So, we're not going to get into those big grossers quite yet again, but maybe we get some solid openings and some legs from this collection of movies that opened before October.
Give us some numbers, like a range here that our listeners can expect, because I don't want the narrative for these titles to be, oh, they opened under 85 million. These original titles don't work at the movies. That's totally unfair. We've been calling for diversity in the slate. What's a rational target that we can look at?
I think on average, pretty much all of these are likely to fall into that mid-teens to maybe low 20s range. Maybe something like The Woman King can break out a little higher. Avatar is the tricky one to call, because we're still waiting to see how wide its re-release will be, even though it's anticipated to be technically wide in terms of thousands of theaters, but that's just a little bit of a different beast. But Don't Worry, Darling, Bros, Smile, these all look like movies that, review dependent and social media buzz from there, anywhere from low teens to potentially upper teens or low 20 million. That's conceivable and probably realistic for virtually all of these movies.
Shawn, I think it's safe to say that so far Q3 is shaping up to be a little bit weird between the lack of titles, some titles like Halloween Ends going day and date, and then National Cinema Day. A lot of different factors here. But if you step back, what is your forecast for Q3 at this point?
Well, I think at this point, it's going to land on a very soft note. It would be challenging, I would say, in a nice way, to surpass what last year's third quarter was. Not impossible, though, just because we had such a strong July lead-in. And August was, essentially, it wasn't very strong, but at the same time, neither was last August for the most part. September is what it's going to boil down to, and what a lot of these movies can do. I think last year we were around a little over 1.7 billion for the third quarter. A similar number, maybe slightly, plus or minus a little bit on either side of that, wouldn't be too surprising for where we end up for this July, August, September corridor this year.
Is there anything that has breakout potential in your view?
I think for the remainder of September, I really look at something like The Woman King, and by then we kind of get to the point where most of these movies will benefit Q4 a little more, like Smile and Bros. Those are essentially Q4 movies with one day of play in Q3. So it's really down to The Woman King and Avatar and Don't Worry, Darling, and hopefully something like Barbarian.
And now looking at that 2022 forecast as a whole, we've seen a number of titles vacate the year. We saw some release changes from Warner Brothers, I think most notably Shazam 2 going to 2023. You've got a couple of changes with Halloween Ends going day and date and Amsterdam being moved up to October. How do you think this year ends up, especially with all this news on the merry-go-round of release date changes?
Yeah, the delay of these Warner films, in particular Shazam, impacted forecasts a little bit because that was the number 2 blockbuster for December. That's not an insult towards Shazam or in any way, but of course we know Avatar is the big one everybody is looking at. And in past years, we've seen over the holidays, multiple films can do really well at the same time. People go see more than one movie, and sellouts can benefit something like that. So the loss of that title does impact where we see things end up. I think Amsterdam is an interesting move that at least gets some high profile content into October, which had looked fairly dry. If it becomes an award season player, that might help it a little bit. Otherwise, it's content, and it will get some seats sold before you get to the likes of Black Adam and Halloween Ends, which is another one of the recent announcements that it would be going to a hybrid release like its sequel last year. I think given the mixed reception on that sequel, maybe Ends has some slight impact on the fact that it will be available at home on the same day. But, ultimately we're all kind of looking to November and December. And I think that's where we'll start to make up a lot of ground. Probably the target at this point is to reach something maybe around 7.2 to 7.3 billion for the year. A major step up from where we were last year. We could even see that go a little higher depending on what Black Panther and Avatar do, because they will, quite frankly, make up the lion's share of business in November and December.
I like your big cat puns. What's the next 100 million opener?
Black Panther.
Okay, nothing before that.
I don't think Black Adam quite gets there. I would love to be surprised. I would love to be wrong on that, but I would go with Black Panther.
Well, those are definitely, I think, numbers that we hope to reach. But at the end of the day, $7.2 to $7.3 billion total for 2022. I'm sorry, guys, I have to look at disappointing. I was really hoping at the beginning of the year with the slate, the way it looked like, that we would hit at least $8 billion. Not getting there, that's a solid C for the industry this year. I hope next year we can get closer to that $10 billion mark, but it's brick by brick here on the recovery.
And Daniel, of course, we don't just want to focus on the North American market. The ripple effects of what happens in the studios here and in Hollywood affects markets around the world. What's been the recent data on cinema recovery in Mexico? Because we do know that was a market that at one point was, I think it's fair to say, fairly far behind in the United States in terms of the recovery. What are things looking like now?
I would say Latin America as a whole, to be completely honest. I think the hit that Latin America has taken in the box office has been harder than any other region around the world. And that recovery has been slower, not only in terms of getting over the hump of COVID and things like vaccine availability, but also in terms of title availability from movies that do really, really well in those markets. Mexico being one of the top markets in the Latin America region, they've suffered with not having availability of certain Disney films that have now gone to Disney Plus, for example. If we look at that 2021 box office for the Mexican market, it was down 60% in local currency compared to 2019. Now, this year has been an improvement. As of August 15th, the box office in Mexico in local currency is tracking 37% behind 2019. Recovery, but not quite there yet. And that's something that our guest in this week's feature segment of the podcast, Roberto Quintero, is going to be going into as we prepare for a big event here in the Mexican market, the market's exhibition convention, CineShow Mexico, taking place on September 28th and 29th in the city of Puebla, bringing together independent exhibitors in Mexico and some representatives from the major circuits as they come together to find out how the market can recover from these challenges. One of those ideas actually took place earlier this week. We had National Cinema Day in the US and UK markets. Mexico had the Fiesta del Cine at Cinépolis locations, the country's top circuit, where tickets went for 29 pesos, around $1.50 per ticket, 3 days, midweek, which is roughly around $1.50 in US currency. So that was 3 days with heavily discounted tickets. We'll see what those results were, but we're seeing those initiatives in the Mexico market to try to make up ground. But enough me talking about it. Let's go right into that feature interview segment with Roberto Quintero, the conference director over at CineShow Mexico. And we are back here on the Box Office Podcast with Roberto Quintero, the organizer of CineShow Mexico, an event here in Mexico, in the city of Puebla. Beautiful city, for those of you that haven't been able to go. Roberto, welcome to the podcast. And can you tell us a little bit about the event? We just had a CineShow in Texas. This is a different event altogether. It's the first exhibition convention in Mexico for a long time. What's the background of putting CineShow Mexico up and above?
Thank you very much, Daniel. It's great to be with you. And let me talk a little bit about CineShow. You know, it's an event that brings together independent exhibitors, art cinemas, and drive-in theaters from Mexico, but not just from Mexico, from all over Latin America, with the aim of training, updating, generating joint strategies, networking, and bringing together industry, allies, and suppliers after this challenge, this big challenge that was the pandemic.
Absolutely. And the pandemic, as we know, in Latin America, it was the region in the world that was most affected by the COVID-19 disruption. Mexico, one of the main markets in the Latin America region. I know the recovery has been slow, but I think it's underway. What's the state of the movie theater industry today in Mexico as you prepare to put on your event?
Sure, thank you. Well, let me tell you first, Daniel, that our tagline is "We come back stronger than ever." That has to do with what you just said. And we think that CineShow will be a party. We want to celebrate that we are alive, that we are still in the show. And well, let me tell you that the impact in Mexico is still big. We have over 40 or 35% lower attendance than before COVID. And well, the CineShow of this year is the third edition. The first one was a small prototype that we made in Puebla too in 2014. The second meeting, it was in 2016 in Mexico City. And well, this time the third edition will be in Puebla, Mexico. Puebla is about 2 hours from Mexico City, to the south, and it's a really important city in our country.
It's a beautiful city with some very historic theaters in that city. I know the Teatro de la Ciudad, a historic cinema, is going to be hosting some events there. Can you tell us some of the history of movie theaters in the city of Puebla as you're going to be hosting the event there?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Daniel. You know, in the 40s and 50s, well, Puebla was like the headquarters of the biggest movie theater chain in all over Mexico. And well, our home this year, El Teatro de la Ciudad, the city theater, was built in 1868.
It's before cinema even was around as a viable business. Forget technology. It's a really historic space. So it's built in 1868. When does it start showing movies? Do you know when it started acting as a movie theater?
Yeah, of course. You know, the owner was Mr. Guerrero Manzano. That's why the name of the movie theater was Cine Guerrero, because of the last name of the founder. You know, the movie theater was operating until it suffered a fire in 1909. Before that, we do not have a lot of information, but when they decided to reopen, well, it was in 1929, and with the Art Deco style that we can see right now. And the movie theater was Santa, Santa was the first sound film in Mexico. So really important people in that years like Agustin Lara, it was a great artist in Mexico, Pedro Vargas, Granica Asensio, Leopoldo Ortiz. Well, they attended this Santa premiere in 1929.
The first sound film in Mexico, the theater that welcomed the entire country, the entire industry revitalizing a domestic film industry. In the period after that, from the 1940s to the 1950s, we had the golden age of Mexican cinema, some really iconic films. The film industry has always found a wonderful home in Mexico with movie theaters. You mentioned that the pandemic has really hit moviegoing in Mexico. I have some facts here from ComScore looking at the average moviegoer visit per year in Mexico. Before the pandemic, in 2019, you'd have 2.77 trips to the cinema per year by moviegoers. In 2020, that went down to 0.5, so half a visit per year per person. That went up in 2021 to 0.9. So it's a 76% increase in terms of frequency. We're not back yet, but we will be. I know 2022 has been a good recovery year here for the industry. What are going to be some of the topics in the panel conversations, Roberto, that you'll be speaking about at the event to prepare for the return of audiences in Mexico?
Yeah, sure. Daniel, let me talk a little bit about why we are doing this event, why the topics, and it has to do with the pandemic. As you all know, the pandemic was the biggest challenge in the film exhibition industry, and of course in Mexico and Latin America. You know, the permanent closure of movie theaters was a very strong blow for all the entrepreneurs and especially the independent exhibitors. Let me tell you, in my opinion, the elements that affected this sector, I mean the independent exhibition, were as follows. First, in the industrial level, of course, the closing of the cinemas. Second, the lack of sensitivity of some governments by not recognizing that cinemas were and are safe places in the face of COVID-19. And the lack of government support, of course, the streaming competition and the enormous piracy that generated the streaming in Latin America, and well, the lack of material by film distributors. But at the level of the independent entrepreneur, there were more challenges. One, the lack of cash flow. Mm-hmm. Second, the lack of bargaining power with suppliers due to the size of the company. Independent exhibitors, well, we do not have so many screens as the chains have. And well, the personal impact of the entrepreneur. Most of them do not have a board to help caution to blow of what was happening. I am sure that the stress generated by the pandemic in the independent entrepreneur was enormous. And well, the topics. We have three sections. The first one is exhibition. We'll have the main post-pandemic challenges and how to face them. Second, the alternative contents for movie theaters in Mexico and Latin America. Third, the supports of government. You know, IMCINE in Mexico is the government institution. We will talk about display windows. We'll have material from distributors. We'll have, of course, Disney and Sony and Paramount and Universal and the other guys talking with us about the movies that will open on 2023. We will talk also about projection and sound, best practices, the benefits of preventive maintenance, new technologies, the future of projection. We will also have seminars for technicians. We will talk also about marketing, the state of the industry, the profile of the new moviegoer after pandemic, management of social networks, digital marketing, the importance of public relations, of PR, the data value of the new moviegoers, and for last, concessions, candies. We'll talk about innovation in concessions, trends in food and beverage, and consumption habits for the new generations. The millennials, the centennials that used to drink and eat different candies that we used to do.
The concessions around the world is always something that really fascinates me. Every country has its own traditions when it comes to the concession stand. You're in the industry here in Mexico. You know the movie theater industry perfectly well, Roberto. How would you describe Concessions in Mexico. What concessions set the market apart from the rest of the world?
Well, perhaps I'm not so objective because I'm from Mexico, but I have traveled, and I guess it's really different. Why? Because food for Latin Americans and food for Mexicans, it's a really important part of our life. We are always planning with the family what to do, what to eat. Eating for us is just like religion.
Mm-hmm.
It's very important what we eat and what we drink in Mexico, and it has to do with movie theaters. In Mexico, our popcorn is different. No, it's different. The amount of salt you use, a hot sauce on it.
Mm-hmm.
Our nachos are different. We do not just use the cheese, but you use avocado and different vegetable and something we call pico de gallo, that it's like a sauce with a tomato and celery and some other issues. So I think the concessions in Mexico, they are really different. In Mexico, moviegoers, we do not just go to movie theaters to watch and to enjoy the movie. We go thinking on what we are going to enjoy, what we are going to eat and drink.
Well, there's so many topics that you're going to be going over. You mentioned the different topics that are going to be in discussion here at this event in Puebla. Could you tell us some of the biggest priorities for Mexican exhibitors today? Because outside of Mexico, I think anyone looking at exhibition thinks of the Mexican market, Cinépolis and CineMix. Two of the largest circuits there. They occupy a majority of the market share. But as you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, it's actually a much more diverse market with a lot more opinions other than the two major circuits.
Yeah, that's right. We have about 500 screens of independent exhibitors. And I guess after pandemic, it's good news for independent exhibitors. I guess that niche films, niche movies will have an opportunity, and I think it won't be necessarily by Cinépolis or CineMX that they make a great job. We have a great movie theaters because of them, but I think now it's a good time for independence. In small communities, we have, just like I said, like 500 screens. So what's the challenge in Mexico? I guess to understand the new moviegoer, I guess to understand the new generations, just like I said, centennials and millennials, they go to the movie different. They go to the movies to eat different food and drink, and to understand that streaming is not a competitor. Anyway, streaming...
That is such a misconception all around the world. People think that the conversation right now in the cinema industry is how can movie theaters compete with streaming? That's not the case at all, especially in Mexico.
Of course, yeah, I agree. I think we make a great team, streaming and movie theaters. And I guess we have a lot of years for the industry, no? Just as families, boy and girlfriend, it's really important in movie theater, no? It's to go there to, it's 2 hours when the problems are not ours, are of Tom Cruise or any...
We'll let Tom Cruise solve the problems for 2 hours. That's the best way to...
Yeah, that's right.
For a while.
It's a travel agency, movie theaters in small communities. No, perhaps young Mexicans that cannot go another places to know another culture, another way of thinking. They discover this diversity by the travel agency that is a movie theater. It's just great. No, they can travel any place, anytime by the screen. So I think we have movie theaters for at least 200 more years more from now.
I completely agree. It's such an interesting market when we talk about the Mexican exhibition business. A lot of people don't realize Mexico, in terms of screens around the world, is the number 4 global market. So China has more screens than anybody else. That's followed by the US and Canada market. India is in 3rd place. 4th place in terms of screens all over the world, Mexico. with 7,400 cinema screens. Now, as we mentioned, Cinépolis, CineMX, they combine for around 6,500, 6,700 of those screens. So the majority, the bulk of those screens come from those two major circuits, but there's still a number of other smaller circuits and 500 or so screens controlled by independents to make this, I think, a very dynamic, a very important market from a global perspective. In that context, what are your expectations for Mexican cinema exhibition in 2023? Do you believe we will continue seeing upward growth in the industry?
No, I guess we'll have a good year. This year, 2023 is not as good as we expected, but I think the next year will be a really, really good year. And let me tell you, about 65 or 75% of the cities in Mexico, they do not have movie theaters, Perhaps 30% of the population makes 70% of the total tickets that are sold in Mexico. So we have a really great opportunity because we will have big blockbusters next year. And there are a lot of Mexican people that do not have movie theaters in town. And that's an option. That's the opportunity for independent exhibitors to do that, right, and make a team, with the big guys, just like CineMX, Cinépolis. They are great friends. They do a great job.
And we see that at the box office as well. Mexico finished 2021 as the number 6 country in the world with tickets sold, according to data from Screen Digest. That's behind China, US, India, Russia, and Japan. But that's above markets like France, like the UK, like South Korea. It's a very important market. And as you mentioned, Roberto, there are still opportunities for growth. It is not necessarily a mature market. It's a very competitive market. There's a lot of innovation there, but still a lot of opportunities. To close up this conversation, Roberto, there are a lot of things happening in Puebla for CineShow to be excited about. What are you most excited about for this edition of the event?
Thank you, Daniel. Well, we are really happy because, just like I said, it's a party. It's a celebration. We want to celebrate that we are alive as entrepreneurs, as industry. We just want to learn soft skills, hard skills in CineShow. And we are sure that CineShow will be every year gathering movie theater owners, gathering sponsors. We appreciate a lot our sponsors, just like Boxoffice, like Christie, Cinexo, Cineonic, Comscore, Dolby, GDC, Harness Hall, Armand, Sillones VIP, Tivoli, Vista. They are great partners of our industry, and thanks. We really appreciate you, Boxoffice, and all the other sponsors that we can make this real. We can make CineShow this year, and we hope we will make it every year from now on.
And that is CineShowMX, CineShowMX, taking place in Puebla, Mexico, September 28th and 29th. You can find more information to register and to sponsor if you're interested at cineshow.com.mx. Roberto, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Daniel, thank you very much. And it's really great to be with you. I used to read Boxoffice since I was 15 or 16 years, and it's great to be part of it this time. Thank you very much.
And that does it for this week's edition of the Box Office Podcast. Thanks again to our co-hosts, Rebecca Pahle and Shawn Robbins, for joining us during the news segment, and to Roberto Quintero of CineShow Mexico for joining us for our feature interview segment. The Box Office Podcast will be back next week. New episodes launch every Thursday, so don't forget to rate, subscribe, and share if you like what we're doing. The Box Office Podcast is produced by Box Office Pro in collaboration with the Box Office Company and Record Edit Podcast. We'll talk to you again next week.